Hello everyone and welcome to the newest edition of Blitzkrieg. This is Remleiz from 40k Theories.
And this is Fiaura. How's everybody doing?
And on this week's episode, we're going to be looking at the vile forces of Chaos. Now, the Chaos forces use a lot of vehicles that are similar to, or outright identical to a lot of Imperial vehicles we've already covered, so we won't be covering things like Rhinos, Predators, Land Raiders, etc. in this episode. Instead, we're going for some of the more esoteric vehicles, I think we should say. So we're going to start this off with the Defiler. Now, the Defiler is a massive six-limbed walker tank, and as is a common trend with a lot of Chaos vehicles, it doesn't actually have crew. It's piloted with the bound spirit of a demon, which means it doesn't have to worry about crew being killed or anything like that. Its main armaments are usually things such as a Reaper autocannon and a Havoc launcher, and also a battle cannon. But there have been variations of this, including twin-linked heavy bolters or las cannons or even heavy flamers. And it also has huge close combat claw pincer dealies at the front as well. And this thing comes in a couple of variants. You've got the standard Defiler. You've also got the Slaughter Fiend, which is a pure melee variant, which is ridden into battle by Khorne Berserkers, because why wouldn't you? You also have the Desecrator, which is the Nurgle variant, which is armed with a Vomit Cannon, so nice and sanitary. The Debaser, which is the Slaneshi variant, armed with a lot of sonic weaponry, such as ultrasonic disruptors, death whalers, and blaster masters. And you also got the Deceiver, the Tzeentch variant, which is armed with ether cannons and heavy flamers and warp flames.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with just the base version of the Defiler and kind of work my way through this. So for a start, since I know this thing has no crew, I'm not particularly worried about protection of the crew. Apparently Chaos are. Weapons are located away from the crew compartment. Ammunition is located away from the crew compartment and then warped in to reload the guns. When I say warped, I mean literally just brought in from the warp. So technically, this thing can't ammo explode because the ammunition isn't carried on the vehicle itself. Oddly enough, the front of this thing on the upper superstructure is very well angled. It is designed literally to prevent quite a bit of what I would consider damage from being able to impact it. In addition to this, with 6 legs, it means that this thing can continue to move even if 4 of its legs have been destroyed outright. Lastly, the sheer variance of weapons combined with what some of them I would simply refer to as well, they're terror weapons, I would say. I really am kind of a little bit traumatized after having to research this one.
Yes, I'm particularly interested in the Vomit Cannon myself, just because that's can't be pleasant out of all of these, let's be honest.
The flexibility and firepower and different weapon systems means that this particular vehicle is more than capable of delivering a lot of different attacks, not to mention it's melee capable. Getting all of that out of the way, the Slaughter Fiend version I find to be particularly ineffective. The reason for this is because the Khorne Berserkers are determined to get into melee combat, whereas the Slaughter Fiend is equipped with a boatload of ranged weapons other than its 2 main claws, so melee combat should be the last thing on its mind. It's kind of a counterproductive of tactics. But the fact that it now carries a squad of melee troops means that
it doesn't carry a squad, it's just a single berserker who rides it like a horse. It's a steed.
Yeah. The way it was described to me was that multiple berserkers could climb onto it. Whole units of berserkers will attempt to clamber onto a nearby Slaughter Fiend in order to ride into the fray. Was how it was described to me. So, yes, there's that one guy riding it, but there's other berserkers now riding on its legs and its body and just holding on, waiting to get to as close to the battle as possible. The one guy riding on top, though, That's that whole ontage that I have to give to 40k where somebody's going, "Get me closer, I want to hit it with my sword." And you probably don't want to get closer.
In that guy's case, he's probably yelling "Yeehaw!"
Probably.
Aside from blood from the blood god, obviously.
Now, the Desecrator version with the vomit cannon.
Yummy.
Ugh. I find not terribly effective against other vehicles. This is definitely an anti-fortification, anti-infantry vehicle. You fire the vomit cannon to clear out buildings. You fire the vomit cannon to hit inside of bunkers. You fire the vomit cannon to wash the trenches with vomit, which is a combination of acid, disease, and maggots that will eat you alive. Thank you, Grandfather Nurgle. I wanted my lunch today. I guess I won't be having it.
Nurgle loves you. Why do you fight this?
Now, the Debaser, I found a little interesting. The ultrasonic disruptor weapons, of course, being that in real physics, I'm not quite sure how they keep the sonic weapons from hurting their own troops. But I found most of the Debasers were actually equipped with giant whips.
Kinky.
Kinky in the "I'm going to slaughter you" way. So the Debaser is the one true model of this, of the Defiler that I think would be excellent at melee combat because, well, not only do you have the big claws, but you have multiple whips and chains, oh my. So that was the kind of take I took on it, was that the Khorne version seems to be equipped with a lot more bang, but there's a Berserker trying to get it in close for some smashing. Whereas the Debaser doesn't have that. Berserker on top, but has an emphasis on close combat weaponry. And
That doesn't sound right.
and shorter range sonic weapons. Slanesh, are you taking hints from Khorne? I'm curious. Now the
No Disney
Deceiver,
senpai.
I'm still not sure how an ether cannon works. Like, I'm really uncertain on how this... Somebody want to explain this one to me? How does an ether cannon... That this was primarily used by a mysterious race called the Feral as a ship-based weaponry, as in spaceship, that could ignore void shields. Tzinch, what have you gotten into?
Just as planned, apparently.
That much said, the ether cannon does pack quite the punch against anyone who's relying on their void shields or any form of shield to defend themselves, considering that it just ignores it and instead slams you with a massive corrosion that eats right through the hull. So for unarmored units, such as the many that the Necrons prefer, or the Eldar, this is
Or
your
Theodore
worst...
Karamazov in his chair.
Yes, this is your worst nightmare. Other than that, it is basically I'm going to sit back and bombard you with my ether cannon, and when you get close, I'm going to spray you with flamers as terror weapons while I try to eat you with battle claws. It's what it does.
So as a vehicle overall, how does the Defiler actually stack up as a vehicle for war?
As a walker, the Defiler's six-legged design indicates that it can function so long as one leg on each side works. Its multi-purpose forward legs, acting as both battle claws and walking legs, mean that they have a hell of a close-range punch, which for most walkers, would dream of. It probably has a slightly enhanced speed due to the efficiency of the six-leg design, in addition to the forward legs acting not only as arms, but kind of acting like a gorilla. When the forward legs are down, they can help propel forward, and when it's time to rear up, they can be used as weapons. In addition to this, the armor is excellently angled on the front, not so much on the sides, but without any internal ammunition storage, to really kill this thing, you're literally going to have to tear it apart. The ammunition is actually stored in the warp, and teleported into the vehicle as it's loaded. So,
and because sorry, carry on.
Since this is being done by a demon instead of a person, the ability to teleport accurately is 100% of the time.
And because it's a demon rather than an actual crew, it's going to have, I would assume, heightened reflexes and response time compared to a crew, because it can just act instantly without having to wait for someone to input the controls.
Correct. In addition to this, because it has no actual physical representation of said crew, to kill it, you are going to have to tear it apart. Literally every single limb, weapon system, and the hull itself is going to have to be completely shredded to pieces and torn across the battlefield before it stops advancing at you. Making this a truly terrifying vehicle to have to fight, because you know for a fact you're going to be putting crack missile after crack missile into it, and it's still going to be coming towards you.
Blood for the blood god indeed. And speaking of which, next up, the Lord of Skulls, another demon engine, which is bound with the spirit of a Bloodthirster. Bloodthirsters, for those of you who don't know, are some of the most dangerous creatures in all of Warhammer 40,000. Now, these things are basically gigantic knights with tank treads, armed with things such as gigantic cleavers of corn, a skull hurler or a Hades Gatling gun, and long-range chest-mounted weapons such as an Ica cannon, demon gore cannon, or gore storm cannon. And judging by those tanks it has on its back, I'm assuming that's a whole lot of boiling liquid to shower with the gore cannons.
It is actually not a whole lot of liquid to shower with the gore cannons, as it turns out.
Oh, is it not?
That's the generators.
Oh.
Because this thing does not run on a standard engine, it runs on a warp-powered engine that apparently is somehow electrical in nature.
Interesting.
Now, the individual weapon systems, I'm going to go over each of these. Launching flaming skulls at people, are we ever going to get over this, Warhammer? Like, the flaming skull has been a thing since forever I remember it, and now we have a dedicated weapon that fires them.
In fairness, I can imagine that being a pretty good terror weapon, because if you have a bunch of flaming skulls land around you, it's going to freak people out, let's be honest.
It is going to freak people out. The Hades Gatling gun I would equate to an assault cannon. It's a 20mm chain gun. It's a minigun. The Gore Storm cannon. How should I put this? It is a weapon purely designed to psychologically scar and cause people to freak the fuck out. By firing high-pressure boiling blood, for a start, people, I want you to understand this. The boiling point of blood is 100 degrees Celsius, or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That is enough to burn and scar tissue of a human being. Not to mention the fact that since it's under high pressure, you can increase that temperature by up to 50% before the blood itself would evaporate. This means that if it hits your skin, you are literally going to feel your own blood boiling inside your flesh.
Well, fuck.
In addition to this, you are now literally covering your opponents in blood. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's a pretty freaky thing to have happen.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Moving on. Sorry.
You had a question.
Because obviously it is boiling blood as well. If you're gonna feel your blood boil, that's obviously gonna. With it being such a high pressure jet, would that potentially be able to essentially bore its way through at high temperature, under high pressure, so you can actually tear people apart with jets of boiling blood?
Generally speaking, that would have to be such a high pressure that it would literally be moving as fast as bullets. What you're going to end up happening is you're going to knock people over and then cover them in the blood. And if they get knocked into, say, a foxhole or a shell hole or something like that and can't get up, they might actually start to drown in it. Not to mention the fact that they are literally starting to cook. As the blood is boiling, it's like throwing an egg into boiling water. You're going to start to cook the egg.
I don't actually know what's worse, being hit with this or being hit with a normal Promethean-based flame weapon.
Well, that's where we get into the Daemon Gore cannon, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
I'm not sure what burning filth is, but it sounds very unpleasant. And the way it's described is literally like a jet. So this is a napalm gun. Congratulations, you have made a short-range, we hate all of you, napalm cannon. According to the information that I have, it should be able to kill their enemy despite armor, flesh, and bone being reduced to molten slurry in a few seconds. This, in fact, doesn't happen in real life. There are videos of this, but it's called the... There's a chemical effect whereby something extremely hot hits something room temperature or not nearly as warm and bounces off. Some people tried to use molten copper versus a Big Mac to illustrate that you shouldn't be eating a Big Mac, and I hate to tell these people, but that actually would happen to regular human flesh too. If you just poured molten copper on it, the flesh is too cold for the copper to stick, so the copper would, for the most part, bounce off. I'm not sure if prolonged exposure would cause the same effect, because as you get exposed to more and more of it, you do heat up, and once you hit a certain temperature, then it starts to stick to you. So if this thing is belching burning filth continuously, then yes, it is in fact going to cook you, but otherwise it should technically bounce off the armor that it hits because of the chemical evaporation effect that happens once it hits the armor. It's not as scary as it seems. Until you realize that it's going to litter this all over the battlefield, so it becomes, instead of a terror weapon, because most of your enemies won't necessarily burn to death from it, it becomes an area denial weapon. You spray it over an area, and now that entire area is on fire. Well, no one's going to want to go through that, so I guess your right flank is now secure. But then again, I'm not sure how hot normal Space Marine armor gets. Now the Ichor Cannon. What is up with corn and blood?
He's the blood god.
Yes. Blood hot shrapnel. Right. The way this is described to me is it's literally firing heated bone and sinew out covered in blood at your opponent. Again, another terror weapon designed to make you afraid. Practically speaking, bone is one of the most impractical objects for which to pierce armor. It's brittle, it fractures easily, it has a lot of hollow points in it, so therefore when it's flying through the air, it actually loses quite a bit of its velocity. However, apparently they also will be scorched and drowned under a steam of foul ichor. So there's some component of ichor added to this. Fair enough. All three of these weapons basically sound like chemical weapon cannons to me, and therefore this entire weapon system appears to be a very dirty weapon. Regardless of what you mount in the tummy. That much said, you're a giant freaking target. The shoulder blades are nice and curved, but for the most part, this is just flat armor all over the place, ready to be penetrated. Even if you are technically, quote-unquote, warping stuff in, and the front tanks, by the way, are actual tanks for whatever the belly cannon is loaded with. The rear tanks were told to me to be generators for the main engine. Not very good having all of that exposed either way, because if that stuff is really as hot as this thing says it is, all we have to do is puncture the tank, and then you are in a hell of a lot of trouble. because you're going to be covering yourself in your own weapon system's live ammunition. In addition to this, there's lots of joints that are exposed that link him to the hull. The tracks are super exposed with no side skirts protecting them. You can see all the inner workings and gears. I could see it being very easy to immobilize this device. In addition to this, the upper torso only has a 120-degree rotation area. That's 60 degrees to the right, 60 degrees to the left. Very ineffective in close combat if you can only rotate most of the way to make a right-hand turn. In addition to all of this, the armor's not terribly thick. It's only as thick as a regular Space Marine's armor, just beefed up to be bigger in size.
Really?
Yes.
That is surprising.
This is actually one of the most vulnerable vehicles that I researched for Chaos. I was quite surprised. Not to mention your belly cannon is a huge target. And I would hate to see what would happen if, say, a Baneblade cannon were to be fired directly into the belly while you're still in formation with your Chaos Brethren.
Suffice to say, there'll be probably a lot of blood.
Everywhere. Moving on.
Yes. Next up, we have the Brass Scorpion. Now, this thing, it comes in a multitude of sizes. They can come either as small as a Leman Russ battle tank or as large as a small Titan. Now, these things are most commonly armed with a tail-mounted Scorpion cannon, a front-mounted Demolisher cannon. Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying. Excuse me. 2 Hellmore flame cannons and 2 large close combat weapons, usually in the form of large pincers, but can also take the form of motorized saw blades. These things said to have predator's instincts and show a level of bloodlust and delight for slaughtering prey, which basically means this thing's going to go around and have a lot of fun going and walking into trenches, ripping people apart, and moving on.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about these things based upon their different size variants. Let's start with the tiny one.
If you can call it tiny.
If I call it tiny. It's the size of a Leman Russ. The tiny one is a ambush weapon. It does not have a lot of armor. It does not have a lot of protection over any of its joints. Its tail-mounted cannon and its demolisher cannon are both short range. It is the type of weapon for which you want to have it, say, burrowed in the sand like a real scorpion, or hiding in the treetops ready to drop on your enemy, if you can find a tree strong enough to support it, or something.
I was just going to say.
It is something that you really particularly want to not expose until it's time to attack, and then you want it to fade as quickly out of view as possible because of the distinct lack of actual armor. Its tail is well armored, but the front of its hull is not, and none of its joints are covered. That much said, that's the small one. Getting into the medium-sized one, the medium-sized one, surprisingly, has significant amounts of armor on the hull, but no armor on the tail, despite having a much larger tail-mounted weapon. In addition to this, the medium-sized one that I took pictures of and handled has saw blades. Giant saw blades. Do you really... I have to ask this question. Do you really expect your enemy to stand still while you advance on him with saw blades?
In fact, aren't they meant to be motorized saw blades?
They are motorized saw blades, yes. They are spinning. However...
So, if this thing like swings the blades with enough velocity at that thing's size, wouldn't that be enough just to cut anything anyway? Potentially.
Motorized saw blades hitting something just as hard as them are more likely to glance off.
Fair enough.
If they hit an object as hard or harder than their blade tips, they will just glance off of it. They won't dig in, they won't continue to hack into it. It's when they hit things softer than them that they continue to hack into it. That is why the Imperium prefers chain swords to saw blades. Chain swords can be held in place, so they are forced to dig in. Saw blades can't. It's kind of like the difference in having a buzzsaw and a chainsaw. The chainsaw will keep cutting into the object so long as you hold it there to do it. The buzzsaw won't. The buzzsaw will kick back and try to get away from the object because it's bouncing off. So I would definitely have preferred this one to be mounted with the pincer weapons. Moving on to the really big one. Holy shit, did you work on the armor? And I apologize to everyone. You really, really worked on the armor. The armor is well sloped, is well designed, is often painted in such a way to be scary as all fuck. Even the claws are armored. It literally walks around with these two big forearm plates covering up its demolisher cannon, which prevents the weapon system from being damaged until it can get in range to use it. In addition to the fact that its tail weapon is massive and also comes with its own melee variant where it has a claw on the tail. The claw on the tail, as it turns out, is literally designed to grab someone, lift them up, and then blast them with the tail-mounted weapon. And toss them aside after that. You're dead. You're just dead if that happens. The fact that the armor is still flexible enough to allow for a tail strike of that magnitude speaks to the articulation mounted here. And the armor extends to armor its legs as well. However, its rear is completely exposed. If you can get behind it, you can hack into the sinew and the circuitry that holds this thing together very easily.
True, but again, because this is a demon engine, and for all intents and purposes, essentially a living creature, it would be a lot harder to be able to get behind to cut those like tendon servos and hydraulics, because it can presumably, feel what's going on, turn round, strike you with the tail, or smack you with the claw.
Yes, presumably. We would hope. However, if you have something in front of it distracting it, it's not going to see it coming, and it's pretty much a hit and run type of deal. You hit the internals once with, say, a power sword, a chain sword, a melt-a-bomb, a few crack grenades, and then you move away and you keep repeating this tactic of distraction and then having someone come in and hit it while it's distracted. But again, and if it's fighting enemies in an urban environment, this is not an urban weapon. It's way too easy in an urban environment to flank or get behind things, and in this case, this thing is not an urban fighter at all. It's a nice open field fighter. It's a nice forest fighter. It's a nice anything that is not that is not a hive city from where the enemy could strike from anywhere at any time.
At the same time, this thing is also said to be excel at attacking 4 or 5 positions and entrenched infantry. Now, assuming because of all these legs, could it not potentially be able to climb up the sides of a hive city?
Yes.
Which is obviously a very intimidating prospect, let's be honest. Having this giant mechanized scorpion climb up the wall of your house.
Extremely intimidating. However, I'm going to point out its underbelly has no armor. So if it's clawing up the top of your house and you have the steel of nerve to stay hidden until it gets just past your window, you could throw an explosive charge on the underbelly and then press the button. Which I'm sure would damage it, but it probably wouldn't kill it. It would just piss it off.
Yeah.
I could see this thing being very effective against a straight fighting style army, but against a guerrilla force, you're going to want Defilers. Defilers have better armor, Defilers have better capability to fight from multiple directions. This creature is strictly I need it in front of me at all times, and I need to make sure that I'm the aggressor in the combat. If it's attempting to fight a defensive battle, it's going to lose.